"You're too fat, but I'll make it fit," the Virgin Mountain Man told the crying mail-order bride. Snow whips through a lonely frontier town. A church bell tolls. Laughter erupts as townsfolk jeer at a woman in her wedding dress, abandoned and ashamed. But then, boots strike the dirt. A towering mountain man steps forward, his voice raw, his words shocking. He didn't order a bride, yet he claims her before them all. What begins as mercy soon stirs something deeper, because hidden in that woman's tears lies a deed worth more than gold, and powerful men will burn, bribe, and kill to take it. Cabins in flames. Riders thundering through the snow. An elder's warning that land is more than profit, it's life itself. Now, the Virgin Mountain Man and the mail-order bride must fight not only for love, but for survival, with enemies closing in from every side. Will a bond born of shame become the strongest stand against greed? Or will winter claim everything before they ever find peace? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The stagecoach wheels crunched through dirty snow as it rolled to a stop in front of Miller's General Store. Steam rose from the horse's flanks in the crisp mountain air, while the driver called out, "Colorado Springs!" His voice carried across the handful of buildings that made up the small town's main street. Delilah May gripped her carpetbag tighter as the other passengers began filing out. Her white satin dress, already wrinkled from 3 days of travel, caught on the narrow door frame. She tugged it free, feeling the first hot prick of tears as snickers rose from the gathering crowd. "Would you look at the size of her?" a woman whispered loud enough to carry. "That poor dress is hanging on for dear life." Delilah's cheeks burned as she carefully navigated the steep steps down from the coach. The worn leather creaked under her weight, and she silently prayed it would hold. Her family had scraped together enough money to send her away, to spare themselves the shame, they'd said. Now here she stood, a mail-order bride whose groom hadn't even bothered to show up. More townspeople gathered, drawn by the commotion of the stage's arrival. Delilah tried to steady her trembling hands as she smoothed her dress. The fabric was thin for the winter weather, but it was the best she owned. She'd wanted to make a good first impression on her intended husband. "Reckon her man took one look and ran for the hills," a gruff voice called out, followed by cruel laughter. "Or maybe he's still trying to find his way around her," another added, sending the crowd into fresh peals of mirth. Delilah clutched her bag closer, as if it could shield her from their mockery. The tears she'd been fighting spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. She wanted to run, to hide. But where could she go? She had no money for a return ticket, and her family had made it clear she wasn't welcome back. "Ain't right to leave a lady waiting in this cold," someone muttered, but no one stepped forward to help. The crowd pressed closer, their jeers growing bolder. Delilah's vision blurred as more tears fell. Her legs trembled beneath her, threatening to give way under the weight of her shame and exhaustion. Just then, the circle of onlookers parted. A tall figure pushed through, his broad shoulders clearing a path without effort. Delilah blinked away tears to see a man unlike any she'd encountered before. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with a thick, dark beard and watchful eyes that reminded her of a hawk's. His buckskin jacket bore the wear of hard living, and his boots were caked with mud and snow. The whispers changed tone immediately. "That's Roman Boone," she heard someone say. "The mountain man. Never comes to town less he needs supplies." Roman's presence seemed to draw the cruel energy from the crowd. He studied Delilah, with an intensity that made her want to look away. But something in his gaze held her. It wasn't disgust or mockery she saw there, but something deeper, recognition, perhaps, of another soul who knew what it meant to stand apart. "This the stage from Kansas City?" His voice was rough, like he wasn't used to using it much. Delilah nodded, not trusting her voice. "You'd be Miss Delilah May, then?" It wasn't a question. Fresh tears welled up as she forced herself to answer. "Yes, sir. But it seems my intended isn't. She couldn't finish the sentence. Roman's jaw tightened as he glanced around at the townspeople who had fallen silent to watch this exchange. His eyes narrowed at their eager faces, drinking in the spectacle of her humiliation. "There's been no mistake," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the winter air. "I'm Roman Boone. I'm the one what sent for you." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Delilah's heart stuttered in her chest. This couldn't be right. The letters she'd exchanged had been with a Jeremy Wallace, a shopkeeper's son. "But I thought," she began. "Best we get you out of this cold," Roman cut in, taking her carpet bag from her trembling hands. "My wagon's just over yonder." The crowd parted further as Roman gestured for Delilah to walk with him. She hesitated, only a moment before falling into step beside him. Whatever was happening, it had to be better than standing there alone while the town mocked her. "You didn't send for me," she whispered as they walked, her shorter legs hurrying to keep up with his long stride. "No, ma'am, I didn't," he replied quietly. "But I reckon we both know Jeremy Wallace ain't comin', and I ain't the sort to stand by while good folks suffer." They reached his wagon, a sturdy vehicle with high wheels and a canvas cover, dusted with snow. A pair of strong draft horses stamped impatiently in their traces, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. "You don't have to do this," Delilah said, even as Roman held out his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. He met her eyes steadily. "Maybe not, but I'm doing it all the same. Unless you'd rather stay here and wait?" Delilah glanced back at the crowd, still watching with avid interest. Her chances of finding work in a town that had already judged her so harshly were slim, and something about Roman's direct gaze made her want to trust him, despite the strangeness of the situation. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting his help up onto the seat. His hand was rough with calluses but gentle as he supported her weight. Roman stowed her carpetbag in the back before climbing up beside her. He took up the reins and clicked to the horses. As they pulled away from the general store, Delilah heard the murmurs of the crowd fade behind them. "My cabin's a fair piece up the mountain," Roman said after they'd traveled in silence for several minutes. "It ain't much, but it's warm and dry. You can stay until spring thaw if you've a mind to. By then, the stage will be running regular again, and you can decide what you want to do." Delilah studied his profile, trying to understand this strange man who'd stepped forward when everyone else had stepped back. "Why are you helping me?" Roman kept his eyes on the snowy road ahead. "Because 20 years ago, I was the one folks was laughing at. Sometimes a body just needs someone to stand beside them, is all." The wagon rolled on through the gathering dusk, leaving the town and its cruel laughter behind. Delilah pulled her thin shawl tighter against the mountain cold, and for the first time since stepping off the stage, she felt something other than shame. It might have been hope. Roman steadied Delilah by her arm as she swayed on the slippery ground. Her white satin dress, so carefully chosen for her wedding day, caught snowflakes that melted into dark spots on the fabric. The street had grown even more crowded as word spread about the abandoned mail-order bride. "Careful there," Roman said quietly, his large hand gentle despite its roughness. "Ground's treacherous with this slush." A burst of raucous laughter drew their attention to the saloon entrance. A man in a whiskey-stained coat stumbled onto the boardwalk, pointing an unsteady finger their way. "Lord Almighty," the drunk called out. "That wagon bench ain't gonna hold. She's too fat for any wagon bench in the territory." The crowd's cruel laughter swelled again. Delilah's shoulders hunched as if taking a physical blow. Roman felt her trembling through his grip on her arm. His jaw clenched as he watched tears spill down her cheeks. Something snapped inside him. Years of keeping to himself, of letting the townspeople's whispers about the strange mountain man roll off his back. It all fell away. He turned to face the crowd, his voice cutting through their mirth like a blade through butter. "You're right, she's too fat," he declared bluntly, causing Delilah to stiffen beside him. But then his voice softened as he added, "But I'll make it fit." The crowd roared with fresh laughter, taking his words as crude humor. But Roman wasn't laughing. His eyes were serious as he looked down at Delilah, who stared back with a mix of shock and confusion on her tear-streaked face. She couldn't tell if he'd just insulted her or offered salvation. "I mean it," he said, loud enough for those nearest to hear. "My cabin, my life. There's room enough, even for someone the good Lord made different from others." Delilah's lips parted in surprise as understanding dawned. This rough-hewn man wasn't mocking her size, but he was promising to accommodate it. To accommodate her. "Come on," Roman muttered, using his broad shoulders to clear a path through the gawking onlookers. "Livery's this way. We need to get my sled ready before dark." He guided her down the muddy street, ignoring the catcalls and whistles that followed them. Delilah hurried to keep up with his long strides, her mind whirling. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. Jeremy Wallace was meant to meet her, to make her his bride. Instead, she had this strange mountain man offering. What exactly? The livery's interior was dim and warm, smelling of hay and horse. Roman led her past the stalls to a quiet corner where they could speak privately. In the lantern light, Delilah could better see his face, weathered by sun and wind, but with kind eyes despite his gruff manner. "I need to speak plain with you, Miss May," he said, removing his hat and running a hand through his thick, dark hair. "I ain't never had a wife. Never wanted one, truth be told. Been living alone up in my cabin these past 15 years, and I was content with that." He paused, searching for words. Delilah waited, clutching her carpetbag like a shield. "But I can't abide cruelty," he continued. "What they're doing out there, making sport of your pain, it ain't right. I got a warm cabin, plenty of supplies laid in for winter. You'd have your own space, your own bed. Stay till spring when the stages run regular again, if you want. Or longer, if." He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. "If what?" Delilah asked softly. "If you find you can bear living with a rough man who ain't got much learning or social graces," he finished. "But I swear on my mother's Bible, you'll be safe with me. Respected, too." Fresh tears welled in Delilah's eyes, but these weren't born of shame. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Roman's gaze dropped to his snow-crusted boots. "Because I know what it's like to be different. To have folks look at you and decide you don't belong." He gestured to his buckskins, his wild beard. "Town calls me the mountain man, the hermit, the crazy one who lives up where only Indians and wolves dare go. Maybe they're right, but I know how to survive up there, and I know how to treat people proper, even if I ain't always good at showing it." Delilah wiped her eyes with her sleeve, considering. The thought of returning to Kansas in defeat made her stomach clench. And staying in this town, where they'd already shown their true nature? Impossible. At least this man had shown her kindness, even if it was roughly delivered. "I accept your offer," she said finally. "Though I warn you, I'm not much use in the wilderness. My skills are more suited to town life." A ghost of a smile touched Roman's lips. "Reckon we'll figure it out together then. Wait here while I hitch up the mule team. We got a long ride ahead of us." While Roman worked, Delilah heard the livery door open several times as curious townspeople tried to peer in. Each time, Roman's sharp glare sent them scurrying back outside. He moved with surprising efficiency, preparing a heavy sled with runners made for snow travel. 2 sturdy mules were hitched to the front, their breath steaming in the cooling air. Roman had packed the sled with hay bales to create a makeshift seat, then covered it with thick buffalo robes. "It ain't elegant," he said apologetically, "but it'll keep you warmer than a wagon would. My cabin's a good 4 hours up the mountain, and the temperature drops quick after sunset." He helped her climb onto the hay bales, making sure she was steady before piling buffalo robes around her. Delilah sank into their warmth gratefully. Her dress had never been meant for mountain weather. "Thank you," she said, as Roman checked the mule's harnesses one final time. "For everything." He ducked his head in acknowledgement, uncomfortable with gratitude. Best save your thanks till we're safe home. Mountain can be mighty treacherous this time of year. The livery doors opened wide, and Roman guided the mules out into the fading daylight. The crowd had thinned somewhat, but enough remained to send a fresh wave of whispers rippling through the street. Delilah held her head high, refusing to let them see her cry again. As they passed the general store, she caught sight of a young man in a shopkeeper's apron watching from the roan doorway. From his stricken expression, she knew it must be Jeremy Wallace, the man who had promised to marry her, then left her to public ridicule. Their eyes met briefly before he ducked back inside. "You all right?" Roman asked quietly, noticing her rigid posture. "Yes," Delilah replied, surprised to find she meant it. "I believe I am." Roman clucked to the mules, and they began their slow journey out of town. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Ahead lay uncertainty, a remote cabin, a life she'd never imagined, and this strange, quiet man who had chosen to be her protector. But behind them lay only shame and broken promises. As the sound of the town faded into the gathering dusk, Delilah drew the buffalo robes closer and faced forward, toward whatever fortune awaited her in the mountains. The mule sled creaked and groaned through the deepening dusk, its wooden runners cutting fresh tracks in the frozen mountain path. The cold bit deeper with each passing minute, seeping through Delilah's thin satin dress despite the buffalo robes wrapped around her shoulders. She pulled her traveling cloak tighter, but it offered little protection against the bitter mountain air. Roman glanced sideways at her trembling form. Without a word, he reached behind the seat and pulled out a thick wool blanket, worn but clean. "Here," he said gruffly, draping it across her lap. "Mountain nights can kill if you ain't prepared. Temperature drops quick up here, especially after sundown." "Thank you," Delilah whispered through chattering teeth, gratefully wrapping the additional layer around herself. The wool carried a faint scent of pine needles and wood smoke. Above them, the first stars began to prick through the darkening sky, diamond bright against deep indigo. The mules' steady breathing and the crunch of snow beneath the runners filled the silence between them. Delilah watched Roman's profile in the gathering darkness, noting how his eyes constantly scanned the trail ahead, alert for dangers she couldn't begin to imagine. The quiet stretched on until Delilah could bear it no longer. "Why do you live alone up here?" she asked softly, careful to keep any judgment from her voice. Roman's shoulders tensed slightly, but his hands remained steady on the reins. After a long moment, he shrugged. "Never learned how to talk proper with folks, especially women." He paused, then added with painful honesty, "Wouldn't know the first thing about being married, neither. Figured it was better to keep to myself than make a mess of someone else's life." His candid admission touched something in Delilah's heart. "I understand feeling like you might ruin things," she said, her voice barely audible above the sled's movement. "My family in Kansas." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue. "They sent me away because they saw me as nothing but a burden. Too much to feed, too much to clothe, too much of everything." Roman's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The silence that followed felt different somehow, less awkward, more companionable. They continued their slow ascent into the mountains as the moon rose, casting silver light across the snow-draped landscape. The night deepened around them, the cold growing sharper with each passing hour. Delilah huddled deeper into her layers of blankets, watching her breath cloud in the starlight. The mules plodded steadily onward, their backs steaming in the frigid air. Near midnight, they finally crested a ridge, and Roman pulled the team to a halt. "There," he said, pointing down into a small valley. "That's home." Delilah leaned forward, squinting through the darkness. A faint curl of smoke rose from a stone chimney, barely visible against the star-filled sky. The cabin itself was a dark shape nestled against the tree line, its single window glowing with the dim light of a banked fire. Roman clicked his tongue, and the mules began their careful descent into the valley. As they drew closer, Delilah could make out more details. A sturdy log structure, not large but well maintained, with a small barn to one side and what looked like a vegetable garden, now buried under snow. They came to a stop before the cabin door. Roman climbed down first, his boots crunching in the snow. He turned and reached up to help Delilah, his large hands careful but strong as he supported her weight. Her legs, stiff from hours of sitting, nearly buckled when she touched the ground. Easy now. Roman steadied her with a gentle grip on her elbow. Take a moment to find your feet. Once she was stable, Roman quickly unhitched the mules and led them to the barn. Delilah waited by the sled, stamping her feet to restore circulation, watching as he efficiently settled the animals for the night. When he returned, he gathered her carpet bag and led her to the cabin door. It ain't much, he warned, his hand on the latch, but it's warm and dry. The door swung open, releasing a welcome wave of heat. Roman ushered her inside, then followed with her bag. A single oil lamp cast flickering light across the interior, supplemented by the red glow of embers in the stone fireplace. Delilah stood just inside the door, taking in her new home. The cabin was indeed small, one room with a packed earth floor covered in braided rugs. An iron cook stove stood in one corner, its pipe joining the fireplace chimney. Rough-hewn shelves lined one wall, holding dishes and provisions. A narrow bed with a brass frame occupied the far corner, covered with a faded quilt. A wooden table with 2 chairs sat beneath the single window, and a rocking chair faced the hearth. Everything was simple, but scrubbed clean and orderly. The log walls were chinked tight against the cold, and dried herbs hung in bunches from the rafters. It smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and pine, somehow both foreign and comforting. Roman busied himself at the fireplace, adding logs and stirring the embers to life. The flames caught quickly, filling the room with warmer light. He moved to the bed next, pulling extra quilts from a trunk at its foot. "You'll take the bed," he said, spreading the additional covers across it. "I'll sleep here by the fire." He indicated a spot on the floor near the hearth. "Oh, but I couldn't," Delilah protested. "It's your bed." "And you're a lady," Roman cut her off firmly. "My ma'd rise from her grave and tan my hide if I let a woman sleep on the floor while I took the bed." His tone left no room for argument. A wave of exhaustion swept over Delilah as the warmth of the cabin began to thaw her frozen limbs. The bed, with its layers of quilts, looked increasingly inviting. "Thank you," she said simply. Roman nodded, then pointed to a curtained alcove in the corner. "There's a washstand back there, if you want to freshen up. Water bucket's full, though it might be a mite cold. I'll stoke the fire and give you privacy to change." He grabbed a blanket and pillow from the trunk, then stepped outside without another word, leaving Delilah alone in what was now, somehow, her home. She stood in the middle of the cabin, still wrapped in her layers of borrowed warmth, listening to the pop and crackle of the fire. The reality of her situation began to sink in. She was here, in this remote cabin, with a man she'd met mere hours ago. Yet strangely, she felt safer than she had in months. Perhaps it was Roman's obvious discomfort with the situation, his painful honesty about his own shortcomings. Or maybe it was the simple fact that he had seen her at her lowest moment and chosen to help rather than mock. The bed called to her weary bones. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, she had shelter, warmth, and the first fragile beginnings of hope. Morning light crept through the frost-feathered window of Roman's cabin, casting delicate patterns across the rough-hewn floor. Delilah stirred beneath the heavy quilts, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The bed's brass frame creaked softly as she sat up, her eyes taking in the empty cabin. Roman's blanket lay neatly folded by the dampened hearth. The steady rhythm of an axe splitting wood drifted through the walls. Delilah wrapped herself in a shawl and peered through the window. There stood Roman, his broad shoulders swinging in a practiced arc as he reduced logs to manageable pieces. Steam rose from his back in the crisp morning air. She turned to the cook stove, finding the firebox cold. With careful movements, she transferred glowing embers from the hearth, using the iron shovel Roman had shown her the night before. Soon, a small fire caught in the stove's belly. She filled the copper kettle from the water bucket and set it to boil. Rummaging through Roman's modest stores, she found a coffee tin and a small sack of flour. The pantry was spare: dried beans, salt pork, and a few wrinkled apples, but she had worked with less during lean times in Kansas. By the time the kettle whistled, she had biscuit dough ready for the oven. The cabin door opened with a rush of cold air. Roman stood in the doorway, axe in hand, caught off guard by the rich aroma of coffee. "You made coffee?" he asked, his voice rough with surprise. Delilah nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. "And biscuits, though they're plain. I found some beans to warm up too, if you're hungry." Roman set his axe by the door and removed his heavy coat. "Ain't had fresh biscuits since." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Been a while." They sat at the small table, steam rising from their tin cups. Roman watched with undisguised wonder as Delilah pulled golden biscuits from the oven. She split them open, spooning warm beans alongside. The simple meal filled the cabin with an atmosphere of home that had long been absent. "Reckon you know your way around a kitchen," Roman said quietly, savoring a bite of biscuit. Delilah felt her cheeks warm at the rebrand. Compliment. "Cooking's always been a comfort to me. When folks—" She hesitated, then continued. "When things were hard, I could still make something good from whatever was at hand." Roman nodded, understanding in his eyes. After breakfast, he cleared his throat. "Best show you around proper, if you're to live here." The morning was bright and cold as Roman led her on a tour of his homestead. The shed stood solid against the mountain wind, its shelves lined with preserved goods and tools. "Summer bounty," he explained, gesturing to rows of jars. "Wild berries mostly, some vegetables from the garden when the weather allows." The smokehouse came next, its interior rich with the scent of cured meat. Delilah listened intently as Roman explained his methods for preserving venison and fish. When they reached his workbench, scattered with wood shavings and half-finished projects, she ran her fingers over a smooth wooden spoon. "Did you make this?" she asked, admiring the careful craftsmanship. "Keeps my hands busy during long winters," he replied, almost embarrassed. "Got to have something to do when the snow's too deep for hunting." Delilah picked up a small axe, testing its weight. "Will you teach me? About hunting and such?" The question surprised them both. Roman studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Reckon you should know how to manage, living up here. Could start with splitting kindling. It's safer than hunting, to begin with." They spent the afternoon behind the cabin, Roman patiently showing her how to hold the axe, how to let its weight do the work. Delilah's first attempts were awkward, but she persisted until she could reliably split the smaller logs. Each successful crack of wood brought a quiet sense of accomplishment. As evening approached, Delilah set about preparing supper. Roman had brought in a haunch of venison from the smokehouse, and she found dried vegetables in the shed. Soon, a hearty stew simmered on the cook stove, filling the cabin with savory aromas. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes when two people begin to understand each other's rhythms. Roman had just pushed back from the table, praising the meal, when a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Both of them froze. Visitors were rare in these mountains, especially after nightfall. Roman rose slowly, one hand moving toward his rifle, but before he could reach it, the door swung open. A man stepped inside, bringing with him a blast of cold air and the sharp scent of bay rum. His suit was fine wool, his boots city-polished leather, marking him as distinctly out of place in the rustic cabin. A railroad man's watch chain glinted at his vest. "Good evening," he said smoothly, removing his hat. "I apologize for the late hour, but my business is urgent." His eyes fixed on Delilah. "Miss May, I presume? Or should I say, Mrs. Boone now?" Delilah's hands clutched her skirts beneath the table. "How do you know my name?" The man reached into his coat and withdrew a leather folio. "I represent the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Company. Your father's recent passing, my condolences, of course, has brought certain matters to our attention." Roman moved to stand behind Delilah's chair, his presence protective. "What matters?" "It seems Mr. May left his daughter a rather significant deed," the agent continued, laying a document on the table. "Approximately 800 acres of prime timberland, stretching from this valley to the pass beyond." Delilah stared at the paper, her father's familiar signature stark against the yellowed page. "I don't understand," he never mentioned. "The railroad requires this land for our expansion west," the agent cut in, his tone hardening slightly. "We're prepared to make a generous offer." Roman's hand came to rest on Delilah's shoulder, steady and warm. "And if we ain't interested in selling?" The agent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I strongly suggest you consider our offer carefully. The railroad has ways of acquiring necessary property, one way or another." The threat hung in the air, like wood smoke. Roman's fingers tightened slightly on Delilah's shoulder, and she felt him straighten to his full height behind her. What had begun as a marriage of convenience and protection now carried stakes neither of them had imagined. The agent laid a card beside the deed. "Think it over. I'll return in 3 days for your answer." He settled his hat back on his head, nodded curtly, and stepped out into the night, leaving behind a silence heavy with unspoken fears. Dawn broke pale and cold over the mountain valley. Roman stood at the cabin window, watching the first light paint the snow in shades of pearl and rose. His jaw tightened as he studied the tracks leading away from the cabin, boot prints that hadn't been there the night before. The railroad man's visit had left more than just threats in its wake. He turned to find Delilah already at the cookstove, her hands steady as she worked biscuit dough. The familiar movements seemed to calm her, though worry lined her forehead. "Sleep any?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Not much. Kept thinking about that man, about father's land." Her fingers pressed deep into the dough. Why wouldn't he tell me about it? Roman pulled on his heavy coat. "Some men keep their business close. Need to haul wood today. Winter's far from over." He didn't mention the tracks he'd seen, not wanting to frighten her more than necessary. Outside, frost crackled under his boots as he made his way to the barn. The mule nickered softly at his approach, eager for breakfast. Roman reached for the harness, then stopped short. His practiced eye caught what others might miss. Leather traces cut clean through, not worn or broken. Someone had taken a sharp knife to the vital straps that connected mule to sled. "Cowards," he muttered, running his fingers along the sabotaged leather. He'd seen such tactics before. Men who worked in shadows, striking at a man's ability to work rather than face him directly. The railroad played a longer game than mere threats. Roman spent the morning in grim repair, his big hands working carefully with awl and leather. He'd learned to fix his own gear years ago. Necessity taught hard lessons in the mountains. By midday, the harness was serviceable again, though the patches showed clear as scars. When he finally hitched the mule and loaded the sled with wood, the sun had passed its peak. The work took longer than usual, each movement careful to test the repairs held. The mule seemed to sense his tension, stepping with unusual care through the snow. Evening found them at the table again, steam rising from bowls of rabbit stew. Delilah had made dumplings to float in the rich broth, but she barely touched her portion. Her spoon stirred aimlessly, making ripples in the surface. "Roman?" Her voice was small in the lamplight. Will the railroad harm us?" He set down his spoon, choosing his words carefully. "Fought worse winters than this. Survived floods, blizzards, bears that wanted my cabin more than I did." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "But I reckon you're right to worry. Men with money can be more dangerous than wolves. Wolves at least hunt honest." Delilah's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup. "In Kansas, I heard stories about homesteaders who wouldn't sell, about fires that started mysterious in the night. "Ain't letting that happen here," Roman said firmly. "Got good neighbors up and down this valley, folk who don't take kindly to railroad men throwing their weight around." He didn't mention that his nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, or that snow often made the trails impassable. They cleaned up in silence, each lost in thought. Roman added wood to the stove, building up the fire to last the night. The routine felt different now. Each task carried the weight of defiance against unseen threats. The moon had risen, casting blue shadows across the snow, when Delilah's head snapped up. "Horses," she whispered. Roman heard it too. The muffled thud of hooves in snow, the creak of saddle leather. More than one rider, moving slow and deliberate. He reached for his rifle, checking the load by feel in the dim light. "Stay inside," he murmured, moving to the door. Away from the windows. The night air bit sharp as he stepped out, rifle ready but pointed down. In the moonlight, he could make out 3 riders, their horses steaming in the cold. They sat motionless at the edge of his clearing, watching. The railroad man's threat hung in his memory. The railroad has ways of acquiring necessary property. One rider spurred forward slightly, then threw something. It landed in the snow with a soft thump. Without a word, the 3 wheeled their horses and melted back into the trees. Roman waited, counting breaths until he was sure they were gone. Only then did he approach the object they'd left. His throat tightened as he saw what it was. His own axe, stolen from the woodpile, now driven deep into the doorpost beside his cabin door. A paper had been nailed to the wood with a brass tack. He pulled it free, squinting at the words in the moonlight. "We'll take what's ours." The cabin door creaked open behind him. Delilah stood there, shawl clutched tight around her shoulders, eyes wide as she took in the axe buried in the wood. "They won't stop, will they?" she whispered. "They'll never leave us alone." Roman wanted to tell her different, wanted to promise that everything would be fine. But the axe caught moonlight like a silver warning, and the tracks in the snow told a story of men who worked in darkness. Instead, he gently guided her back inside, where lamplight made the shadows less threatening. "We'll face it together," he said quietly, setting his rifle back in its place. "Whatever comes." Delilah nodded, but her eyes kept straying to the window, as if expecting to see more. Riders materializing from the darkness. The railroad's message was clear. This was only the beginning. The land they wanted wasn't just timber and soil anymore. It was their home, and they would have to fight to keep it. Roman stoked the fire higher, pushing back the night's chill. Neither of them would sleep much, but at least they weren't facing the darkness alone. The axe remained outside, its blade catching moonlight like a promise of troubles yet to come. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting the snow-covered valley in soft rose and gold. Roman stood at the cabin window, watching the first rays touch the axe still buried in his doorpost, a stark reminder of last night's threats. But instead of removing it, he walked to the woodshed and retrieved another axe, its handle smooth from years of use. Inside, Delilah was already up, adding wood to the cookstove. She jumped slightly when he set the axe on the table with a solid thunk. "Time you learned," Roman said quietly. "Can't always be here to split kindling." Delilah's eyes widened, darting between the axe and his face. "Me? But I've never. Ain't about what you've done before. It's about what needs doing now." He pulled on his coat. "Come on," while the morning's still cool. Outside, frost crunched under their boots as Roman led her to the chopping block. He positioned a small log, then lifted the axe with practiced ease. "Watch close. Ain't about strength, it's about letting the weight do the work." The axe fell, and the log split clean. He set up another, then held out the handle to Delilah. She hesitated only a moment before taking it, her fingers wrapping tentatively around the worn wood. "Stand here," Roman guided her into position. "Feet apart, like you're bracing against a wind." He stepped back, watching as she lifted the axe. Her first swing went wide, barely nicking the wood. The second bounced off harmlessly. "Take your time," he encouraged. "Find your balance." Delilah's face set. In determination, she adjusted her grip, took a deep breath, and swung again. This time the blade bit deep, though it stuck halfway through. She tugged, but the axe wouldn't budge. "Here." Roman stepped closer, showing her how to use the trapped axe head as leverage, rocking it slightly until the log split. A small triumph, but her smile could have lit the valley. For the next hour, Delilah worked steadily at the chopping block. Her swings grew more confident, though still awkward. Sweat beaded on her brow despite the morning chill, and her breaths came in clouds of steam. But she didn't quit, even when her arms trembled with fatigue. Roman watched, noting how she adjusted her stance to accommodate her size, finding ways to make the work easier. There was something in her persistence that spoke of deeper strength than mere muscle. When she'd split enough kindling to fill the wood box, Roman called a halt. "That'll do for now, but there's something else you need to learn." He disappeared into the cabin, returning with 2 pairs of snowshoes. Delilah eyed them dubiously. "I've seen these before, but never." "Can't stay cabin-bound all winter," Roman explained, kneeling to help her strap them on. "Might need to move quick someday, snow or no snow." He demonstrated the basics: how to walk without crossing the frames, how to turn without tangling. Delilah took her first tentative steps, arms out like a child learning to walk. The snowshoes seemed impossibly large beneath her feet. "Like walking with baskets tied to your boots," she muttered, wobbling slightly. "You'll get used to it. Just keep your weight centered and—" Before he could finish, Delilah lost her balance. She windmilled her arms, then toppled sideways into a deep drift. For a moment, she disappeared entirely in the powder snow. Roman started forward, concerned, but then heard something unexpected: laughter. Delilah's head emerged from the snow, her face flushed with cold and mirth. "Oh my," she gasped, between giggles. "I don't suppose that's the proper technique." Roman felt his own lips twitch. "Not generally recommended, no." He helped her up, brushing snow from her clothes. Her laughter had transformed her face, erasing the worry lines that had creased it since the railroad man's visit. They practiced until the sun stood high, Delilah improving steadily despite several more falls. Each time she got back up, determination replacing embarrassment. By the time they returned to the cabin, she could manage a fairly steady walk, though turns still proved treacherous. The afternoon passed in ordinary tasks, Roman checking his trap lines while Delilah tended to household chores. When he returned with 2 rabbits, she had bread rising by the stove and was sorting through his meager stock of dried vegetables. As she prepared supper, she began to hum softly, an old hymn that seemed to fill the cabin's corners with warmth. The simple melody wrapped around them like a quilt, pushing back the lonely silence that had been Roman's only company for so long. He found himself watching her as she moved about the cabin. Despite her size, she had a grace to her movements, a sureness that came from knowing her work well. The shame that had bent her shoulders in town seemed to lift a little more each time she mastered a new task. When they sat down to eat, Roman cleared his throat awkwardly. "You did good today, with the axe and all." Delilah ducked her head, but he caught her small smile. "I know I'm not what anyone would choose, too big for most things, too much of a burden. But I want to learn, to be useful." "You belong here," Roman said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Much as I do, maybe more. Cabin's been needing a woman's touch for too long." She looked up then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a chance, for not seeing just." She gestured at herself. Roman nodded, uncomfortable with the emotion, thick in her voice. They finished their meal in silence, but it was a comfortable, quiet, broken only by the crackling fire and the wind's soft moaning around the eaves. Later, as he lay on his bedroll near the stove, Roman heard it, muffled crying from the bed where Delilah lay. Not the harsh sobs of fresh grief, but the quiet weeping of someone carrying old hurts. He stayed still, respecting her privacy, knowing some wounds needed darkness and solitude to heal. But as he listened to her tears gradually soften into sleep, Roman found himself hoping she would find more than just safety in his cabin. Perhaps they both might find something they hadn't known they were missing, a place to truly belong. Roman's boots crunched through the crusted snow as he made his morning rounds checking trap lines. The sun had barely cleared the eastern ridge, painting long shadows across the valley. His breath clouded in the crisp air as he worked, methodically checking each set. At the third trap, movement caught his eye. Not an animal, but a figure standing quietly among the pines. An elderly native man watched him, gray hair bound beneath a wool cap, his weathered face calm and dignified. Roman's hand twitched toward his rifle, but something in the man's bearing made him pause. "Good morning, friend," the elder said in clear English, raising his empty palms. "I am Nokose of the Ute people. I have watched you these past days, you and your new wife." Roman straightened slowly. "Name's Roman Boone. Didn't know we had company." "These valleys have many eyes," Noko said, moving forward with careful steps. "We have seen the railroad men at your cabin, and we know of the paper your wife carries, the deed to timberlands." "That ain't your concern," Roman said gruffly, though his tone held more wariness than threat. Nokose's dark eyes were sharp despite his years. "But it is, friend. The streams that run through those forests, they are sacred to my people. For generations we have protected them, used their waters for ceremony and healing." Roman felt his stomach tighten. He'd heard of sacred lands before, but hadn't known any lay within these valleys. "Delilah don't mean no harm. She didn't even know about the deed till that railroad man showed up." "Yes, I see truth in her face when she works in your yard," Nokose nodded. "She is not one who grasps with greedy hands. That is why I come to you now, before choices become fixed like ice in winter." A jay called harshly overhead as Roman considered the elder's words. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Let me speak with her," Noko said. "Let us find a way to share stewardship of the land, rather than fight over ownership like wolves over meat." Roman scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Reckon that's fair enough. But I warn you, them railroad men won't take kindly to any such arrangement." "The Iron Horse has its own path," Nokose agreed. "It need not run through sacred waters." Together they walked back to the cabin, where smoke rose straight and thin from the chimney into the cold morning air. Delilah stood in the doorway, her eyes widening at the sight of their visitor. "Delilah," Roman called out. "This here's Nokose. He's got something important to discuss with us." Inside the cabin, Noko sat with quiet dignity at their rough table while Delilah poured coffee into tin cups. Her hands trembled slightly as she served their guest, but her voice was steady. "You're welcome at our fire, sir." "Thank you, daughter," Nokose said kindly. "Your hospitality honors us both." He took a careful sip of coffee before speaking again. "I have come about the land deed you hold." Delilah's face paled. "The timberland? But I never meant. I didn't even know about it until—" Nokose raised a weathered hand. "Peace, daughter. I see honesty in your heart. That is why I come in friendship, not anger." As the elder explained about the sacred streams, Delilah's expression shifted from anxiety to distress. "Oh, no," she whispered. "Have I stolen something that was never truly for sale?" "The white man's paper says you own the trees and earth," Nokose acknowledged. "But we believe the land owns itself, and we are merely its caretakers." "Then what can I do?" Delilah asked earnestly. "I don't want wealth built on someone else's loss." Roman shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Delilah, think careful now. That deed might be our only protection against the railroad." But Delilah's chin lifted with quiet determination. "Money isn't worth as much as doing what's right, Roman. I've been judged too much by others to turn around and do the same." Nokose's eyes crinkled with approval. "I offer this. Let us share the land as partners. Your paper will still stand against the railroad's greed, but my people will help protect the streams and forests. Together we can be stronger than alone. The settlers won't like it, Roman warned. Some still tell tales about Indian raids, even though the wars are long past. Then we must show them a different story, Delilah said firmly. One of neighbors helping neighbors, no matter their differences. She turned to Nokose. I accept your offer, sir. The land should be shared, not owned. Roman watched his wife's face, seeing the same quiet strength that had helped her endure the town's mockery. He knew she was right. Fighting over the land would only bring more trouble, while sharing it might bring unexpected allies. Well then, he said gruffly. Reckon we'd better figure out how to make this work. Over the next hour, they talked details. Nokose explained which waters were most sacred, used in healing ceremonies passed down through generations. Delilah suggested ways to protect both timber and streams, while Roman offered practical advice about marking boundaries the railroad men would have to respect. We will bring this proposal to our elders, Nokose said as he prepared to leave. But I believe they will approve. You have shown wisdom in choosing peace over profit. Delilah stood to see him out, her earlier nervousness replaced by quiet purpose. Thank you for trusting us with your people's sacred places. We won't forget this. After Nokose disappeared into the trees, Roman turned to his wife. You sure about this? Could make life harder, taking sides against our own folk. They're not our folk if they'd steal what's sacred to others, Delilah said softly. Besides, I know what it's like to be pushed aside, told I don't belong. I won't do that to others, not while I have any say in it. Roman studied her face, seeing beyond her size to the courage beneath. This woman who'd arrived in tears less than a week ago now stood ready to challenge both railroad men and settlers' prejudices. He felt something shift in his chest. Respect, yes, but something warmer too. Well then, he said, reaching for his coat. Reckon we'd better get to work. Nokose showed me where the first sacred stream runs. Might as well start learning our new responsibilities. Together they stepped out into the crisp morning, ready to begin their role as caretakers rather than owners. The sun had risen higher now, making the snow crystals sparkle like scattered diamonds. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, a wild, free sound that seemed to approve of the choices they'd made. The old ways and the new had found common ground, not in ownership of the land, but in shared stewardship of its gifts. As Delilah and Roman walked toward the sacred stream, their boots leaving parallel tracks in the snow, they knew they'd chosen a harder path, but also a truer one. The sled runners creaked over packed snow as Roman guided the mule team toward town. Beside him, Delilah sat wrapped in warm quilts, her cheeks pink from the cold mountain air. Behind them rode 3 more sleds carrying Nokose and his family members, their breath forming clouds in the winter morning. You sure about this? Roman asked quietly, his eyes fixed on the quiet road ahead. Folks in town ain't likely to understand our arrangement with the Ute. Delilah's gloved hand found his arm. We need to make this proper, Roman. A real marriage will help protect the land. And us. He nodded, though his shoulders stayed tense. The thought of standing before others, speaking vows, made his palms sweat despite the chill. He'd lived alone so long. The ways of ceremony felt foreign as a different language. As they approached the town, heads turned and whispers started. Women paused in sweeping their porches. Men stopped mid-conversation outside the general store. The sight of the reclusive mountain man and his large bride, followed by Native Americans in traditional dress, sent ripples of gossip through the streets. Land's sake, look who's come to town, a woman's sharp voice carried across the street. The hermit and his hefty bride, bringing savages with them. Roman's jaw tightened, but Delilah squeezed his arm again. Let them talk, she whispered. We know what's true. They drew the sleds to a halt outside the small log church. Nokose and his family dismounted with quiet dignity, ignoring the stares and mutters from townspeople gathering at a safe distance. Roman helped Delilah down, supporting her weight as she found her footing in the snow. Inside the church, the air smelled of pine wood and lamp oil. Sunlight filtered through frosted windows, casting gentle shadows across rough-hewn pews. The circuit preacher, Reverend Mills, looked up from his Bible, with raised eyebrows at the unusual group entering his sanctuary. "Reverend," Roman said, clearing his throat, "we've come to ask for a proper blessing for our marriage." The preacher studied them both, then glanced at the Native Americans standing respectfully near the door. "This is unexpected, Mr. Boone. You've never been one for church attendance." "No, sir, I ain't," Roman admitted. "But some things need doing right. Delilah deserves a proper wedding, not just taking her in from the cold." Delilah stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "Please, Reverend, we want God's blessing on our union." Reverend Mills considered for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Though I must ask, why have you brought?" He gestured uncertainly toward Nokose's family. "There are witnesses," Delilah said firmly, "and our friends." The preacher's eyebrows rose higher, but he didn't argue. Instead, he moved to light more lamps as the winter afternoon began to dim. The warm glow filled the small church, making the rough walls feel almost holy. "Stand here," he directed, positioning them before the simple wooden altar. Roman's hands trembled slightly as he faced Delilah. She smiled up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," Reverend Mills began, his voice carrying in the hushed space. "A bond blessed by God himself, joining two hearts as one." Roman shifted uncomfortably, aware of every creak of his boots on the wooden floor. The preacher's words about love and devotion made his throat tight. He'd never thought to stand here, never imagined speaking such solemn promises to anyone. When the time came for vows, Roman's voice came out rough and uncertain. "I ain't never." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I mean, I've never known a woman before. Never thought I would. But I vow to be true to you, Delilah May, to protect you, provide for you, and," his voice cracked slightly, "to love you as best I know how." Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "I vow to be your faithful wife, Roman Boone, to stand beside you in all seasons, to make our cabin a home, and to love you with all my heart." Behind them, Nokose's wife murmured something soft in Ute, a blessing of her own. The preacher looked startled but continued with the ceremony, guiding them through the exchange of simple brass rings Roman had traded for in the general store that morning. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Mills concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Roman stood frozen, uncertain what to do next, until Delilah rose on tiptoe and pressed a gentle kiss to his lips. His arms went around her automatically, supporting her, drawing her close. The touch of her mouth on his sent warmth spreading through his chest, making his heart pound like a young man's. When they turned to face their witnesses, Nokose stepped forward. His weathered face held approval as he gripped Roman's hand. "You have chosen well, friend. A strong woman, with a good heart." "Thank you," Delilah said softly, including all of Nokose's family in her grateful smile, "for standing with us today." Outside, snow had begun to fall in lazy spirals. The townspeople had dispersed, leaving the street quiet except for the soft whisper of snowflakes. Roman helped Delilah back onto their sled, tucking the quilts around her with careful hands that lingered longer than strictly necessary. As they started the journey home, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and blues, Delilah leaned against Roman's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For making me your wife. For real." He glanced down at her, seeing joy where there had been shame just days ago. "Reckon I'm the one who should be thankful. Never thought I'd find someone willing to take on a rough old mountain man." She laughed softly, the sound carrying on the still air. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? The hermit and the outcast, finding home together. Behind them, Nokosa's family followed in their sleds, their presence a quiet affirmation of the unusual bonds being forged in these mountains. The snow fell thicker now, but Roman knew every turn of the trail home. Home. The word held new meaning now, with Delilah beside him as his wife. As they crested the final ridge, the cabin's windows glowed with warmth, smoke rising straight from the chimney into the darkening sky. Their tracks from the morning had already been softened by fresh snow, but new ones would take their place, the parallel paths of husband and wife, marking their journey forward together. The wedding party's spirits remained high as they wound their way back through the mountain paths. Roman's mule pressed steadily forward through deepening snow, while behind them, Nokose's family followed in their own sleds. Delilah huddled close to Roman's side, her new brass ring catching occasional glints of the fading sunlight. "First time I've felt truly married," Roman admitted quietly, adjusting the reins. "Reckon having a preacher say the words makes it more real somehow." Delilah smiled, patting his arm through his thick coat. "It does feel different now, like we're properly—" She broke off suddenly, her body tensing. As they crested the final ridge overlooking Roman's valley, dark smoke billowed against the gray winter sky. Not the usual thin stream from the chimney, but thick, oily clouds rolling up from where their cabin should be. "No," Roman breathed, his face draining of color. He snapped the reins, urging the mule to greater speed. "No, no, no!" The sled lurched forward, nearly unseating Delilah as they careened down the slope. Behind them, she heard Nokosa's family calling out in alarm, but the words were lost in the rush of wind and panic. They rounded the last bend to find the cabin fully engulfed in flames. The heat hit them like a physical wall, even through the cold air. Sparks swirled up into the falling snow, orange against white. The roof had already collapsed inward, and flames licked out through the windows like hungry tongues. Roman leaped from the still-moving sled, stumbling through knee-deep snow toward the inferno. "The deed!" he shouted. "Delilah's deed!" But it was too late. The entire structure was consumed, walls blackened and crumbling. Even as they watched, another section of wall fell inward with a crash of burning timbers. Delilah tried to stand, but her legs gave way. She slid from the sled into the snow, her wedding dress soaking through instantly. Everything, all their food, their supplies, her few precious belongings, the deed to her father's timberland, all of it gone to ash. "My dress," she whispered, thinking of the white satin gown she'd brought from Kansas, now surely reduced to cinders. "My mother's Bible." Her voice broke on a sob. Roman had been circling the burning cabin frantically, looking for any way in, but the heat drove him back again and again. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes wild. When he heard Delilah crying, he turned and rushed back to her side. "I'll kill them," he growled, gathering her into his arms. "Those railroad men, I'll hunt them down and—" "No," Delilah clutched at his coat. "No more violence. Please." She shuddered, tears freezing on her cheeks. "This is my fault. I brought this trouble to your door. If I hadn't come with my cursed deed, don't you dare blame yourself." Roman cut her off fiercely. "This ain't your doing. It's those greedy devils who think they can take whatever they want." Nokose and his family had caught up to them now. The elderly Ute chief dismounted carefully, his face grave as he surveyed the destruction. "The spirits will remember this evil," he said quietly. "Those who destroy homes and sacred bonds will face justice." The snow was falling harder now, thick flakes hissing as they met the heat of the fire. The sound seemed to mock them, turning their ruin into eerie silence. Delilah couldn't stop shaking, though whether from cold or shock she wasn't sure. "All our food," she whispered. "The winter stores." Roman's arms tightened around her. "We'll survive. I've lived off the land before. I can do it again. But where will we sleep? What will we eat?" Delilah's voice rose with panic. "The deed without it. How can we prove the land is mine? The railroad will—" "Hush now." Roman soothed, though his own voice was rough with emotion. We'll figure something out. First thing is getting you somewhere warm before night falls proper. Nokose stepped forward, speaking in his careful English. My people's winter camp is not far. We have extra furs, food to share. You will come with us until new shelter can be built. Roman started to protest, his pride warring with necessity, but Delilah gripped his arm. Please, she begged. We have nowhere else to go. He looked down at her, saw the desperation in her eyes, and nodded slowly. Much obliged, Nokose. We won't forget this kindness. As the last walls of the cabin collapsed in a shower of sparks, Roman helped Delilah back onto their sled. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the ruins of what had so briefly been their home. All her hopes of belonging, of making a life here with Roman, seemed to be going up in smoke with everything else. I'm sorry, she whispered again. So sorry. None of that now, Roman said firmly, though his voice shook slightly. We're alive. We're together. That's what matters. He gathered the reins, guiding the mule to turn away from the burning remains. They meant to break us, sending us this wedding gift, but they don't know how strong you are. Delilah wanted to believe him, but as they followed Nokose's sled through the thickening snow, she couldn't stop the tears that froze on her cheeks. Her wedding day had turned to ashes, just like everything else she'd ever tried to hold on to. The smoke rose behind them, a dark column against the white sky, marking the place where their dreams had burned. But Roman's arm was steady around her waist, and ahead through the swirling snow, Nokose's family led the way to shelter. They had lost everything but each other, and perhaps, Delilah thought with desperate hope, that would have to be enough. Roman guided the exhausted mule through deepening drifts, one hand steady on Delilah's back as she swayed with fatigue. The line shack appeared through the swirling snow like a dark smudge against white, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, used by ranchers during spring roundup. He had spotted it earlier while scouting the area, knowing they couldn't make it to Nokose's camp before nightfall. It ain't much, he said apologetically, helping Delilah down from the sled, but it'll keep us alive till morning. The wooden door creaked open on rusty hinges, revealing a space scarcely bigger than a proper bedroom. A crude stone fireplace dominated one wall, while a narrow cot with a threadbare blanket hugged another. Delilah stumbled inside, her wedding dress now soaked and frozen stiff. Her teeth chattered as Roman quickly gathered what kindling remained in the corner. "Let me get a fire going," he muttered, his fingers clumsy with cold as he struck flint to steel. "Got some of that venison wrapped in my coat. Saved it from the sled before." He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what he meant before their home had burned to ash, taking with it all their supplies and Delilah's precious deed. The memory of smoke rising against snow still burned fresh in their minds. The kindling caught with a welcome flare of warmth. Roman built up the flame carefully, precious awareness of how little wood they had, making each piece count. Behind him, Delilah sank onto the cot, her massive frame making the ancient springs protest. "Your dress is soaked through," Roman said, not looking at her. "You'll catch your death if you don't change." "Into what?" Delilah's laugh held no humor. "Everything I owned was in that cabin. Every stitch of clothing. Every." Her voice broke. Roman turned to find tears freezing on her cheeks. Without thinking, he shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was old buckskin, worn smooth with years of use, but still warm from his body. "Here now," he said gruffly. "We'll figure something out. Nokose's people promised help, remember?" Wind howled through gaps in the log walls, making the single candle flame dance wildly. Roman busied himself laying out their meager supplies, the wrapped venison, a few biscuits Nokose's wife had pressed into their hands, a single tin cup they could use to melt snow for water. It wasn't much to stand between them and starvation. Hours crept by. The fire burned low, each stick of kindling precious. Roman insisted Delilah take the cot while he settled on the floor nearby. though the thin blanket did little against the cold that crept through the floorboards. Neither could sleep. Wind keened through every crack, and snow drifted in beneath the door, despite Roman's attempts to block it with his saddle. "I can hear you shivering," Delilah said softly in the darkness. "I'm fine," Roman insisted, though his teeth threatened to chatter. "Known worse nights on the mountain." "Liar." There was a rustle as Delilah shifted on the cot. "This is probably the worst night of your life, and it's my fault. Everything that's happened, the cabin burning, losing your supplies, being driven out into the cold, it's all because of me." Roman sat up, barely able to make out her shape in the dying firelight. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Bitter grief filled her voice. "My family sent me away because I was a burden. Too big, too much trouble, eating too much food. And now look, I've brought the same curse to you. The railroad men would have left you alone if not for my father's deed. You'd still have your cabin, your peace." "Stop." Roman's voice came out sharper than he intended. He moved closer to the cot, finding Delilah's hand in the darkness. Her fingers were ice cold. "Listen to me. You ain't no curse." "How can you say that?" She tried to pull away, but he held firm. "Look at me, Roman. Really look. I'm too fat for any normal life. Too much of a burden for my own family to keep. Even the land I brought with me has turned poisonous, bringing nothing but trouble and fire." I said stop. Roman's grip tightened on her hand. He could feel her trembling, and not just from cold. "You want me to look at you? Fine. I'm looking. Know what I see?" Delilah fell silent, waiting. "I see a woman stronger than she knows," Roman continued, his rough voice gentling. "I see someone who faced down a town's worth of mockery with her head high. Someone who learned to split kindling and walk on snowshoes without complaint, though her hands blistered something fierce. Someone who made my lonely cabin feel like a real home for the first time in 15 years. Roman." Delilah's voice wavered. "Let me finish." He drew a deep breath, struggling to find words for feelings he'd never learned to express. "You think you're a curse? Truth is, you're the only blessing I've ever known. Before you came, I was just existing, weren't really living at all. Just me and the mountains and my own stubborn pride." The wind's howl filled the silence between them. Roman plowed ahead, knowing if he stopped now, he'd never find the courage to continue. "That deed of yours? It ain't poisonous. It's showing us what's worth fighting for. And your size?" He squeezed her hand. "Don't matter to me. Never did. What matters is your heart, your spirit. The way you hum them hymns while you work, filling up all the empty spaces I never even knew were there." Delilah's breathing hitched on a sob. "But I've brought you nothing but trouble." "Trouble?" Roman almost laughed. "Woman, I've lived alone in these mountains most of my life because trouble scared me. Easier to avoid people than risk caring about them. But you," he paused, gathering his thoughts, "you made me realize some things are worth the trouble. Worth fighting for. Worth protecting." "Even now?" Delilah whispered. "With everything gone? Especially now." Roman shifted closer, until he could see her face in the faint glow of embers. "Cabin's gone, yes. But we're alive, together. And I mean to keep it that way, railroad men or no." A fresh gust rattled the door, sending a cascade of snow through the gaps. Delilah shivered, and Roman acted on impulse. He rose from the floor, gently pushing her to make room on the narrow cot. "What are you doing?" she asked, tensing. "Keeping us both from freezing," he said matter-of-factly, though his heart hammered. "Ain't proper, maybe, but we're married now, and body heat's body heat." After a moment's hesitation, Delilah moved over. Roman stretched out beside her, pulling his coat over them both like a blanket. Her solid warmth pressed against him, and gradually, her trembling began to ease. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what? For seeing me. Really seeing me. Not just." She gestured vaguely at herself. Roman found her hand again, weaving their fingers together. "Reckon we're seeing each other clear now. Both of us." The wind continued its mournful song outside, but inside the line shack, something warm and tender grew between them. Not passion, they were both too cold and exhausted for that, but understanding, trust. The beginning of love, perhaps. "Rest now," Roman murmured, feeling Delilah's breathing slow against him. "Tomorrow we'll figure out our next move. But tonight," he squeezed her hand, "tonight, just know you're no burden to me. Never were, never will be." Delilah's only response was to nestle closer, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder. Roman held her, marveling at how natural it felt. The line shack was drafty, their future uncertain, but in that moment, he knew with bone-deep certainty that he'd meant every word. She was his blessing, not his burden. And whatever came next, they would face it together. Dawn broke harsh and cold over the mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of rose and gold. Roman stood at the line shack's door, rifle cradled in his arms, watching fresh tracks in the snow. Hoofprints circled their shelter railroad men, testing their defenses in the night. A movement caught his eye. For a moment, his finger tensed on the trigger. But then he recognized the distinctive stride of Nokose emerging from the tree line. The Ute elder wasn't alone. Behind him came 6 warriors, each carrying weapons and supplies. "Brother," Nokose called out in greeting, "word travels fast in these mountains. We heard about the burning." Roman's shoulders eased slightly. "Much obliged for coming. The sacred waters belong to all of us," Nokose simply. "We will help guard what matters." He gestured to his men, who began setting up a careful watch around the perimeter of the line shack. The door creaked behind Roman as Delilah emerged, wrapped in his buckskin coat. Her eyes widened at the sight of their allies, but she stepped forward without hesitation. "Welcome, friends," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "I wish we had more to offer in hospitality." Nokose's weathered face creased in a smile. "You offer what matters most, truth and courage. These are worth more than coffee or bread." As if his words had summoned them, sounds of approaching wagons echoed through the valley. Roman tensed again, but these weren't railroad men. 3 wagons appeared, driven by familiar faces from town, the blacksmith's wife, the general store owner, and others who had once laughed at Delilah. The first wagon pulled up, and Martha, the blacksmith's wife, stood up. "We heard what happened," she called out. "Brought what we could spare." She began unloading quilts, preserved food, and cooking supplies. Roman's jaw tightened. "We don't need—" "Hush," Delilah touched his arm gently. "Pride won't keep us warm or fed." She stepped forward to accept the offerings, her dignity transforming what could have been charity into something deeper community. More wagons arrived throughout the morning. The general store owner brought tools and nails. The livery stable master delivered fresh hay for their mule. Even families who could spare little shared what they had: a pot of beans, a sack of flour, a warm shawl. By midday, the preacher himself appeared, Bible tucked under his arm. He surveyed the gathering of settlers and Ute warriors with approval. "Bear ye one another's burdens," he quoted, "and so fulfill the law of Christ." He turned to Delilah and Roman. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing hearts together for His purpose." Delilah wiped tears from her eyes. "I never thought, after how they treated me that first day." "People can surprise you," the preacher said kindly. "Sometimes it takes seeing real courage to find their own." Roman watched his wife move among their unexpected allies, accepting each gift with grace and genuine gratitude. She had a way about her, he realized, that made people want to be better than they were. The peaceful scene shattered at mid-afternoon. 6 railroad men rode in, their horses' hooves kicking up snow. Their leader, expensively dressed in a fur-lined coat, pulled up short at the sight of the gathered community. "Mrs. Boone," he called out, his voice smooth as silk. "I've come with a generous offer. $5,000 for your deed and claim. Enough to start fresh somewhere more. comfortable. His eyes flicked dismissively over the crude line shack. Delilah stepped forward. Where once she might have hunched her shoulders or hidden behind others, now she stood straight and proud. "This land isn't for sale," she said clearly. "Not at any price. Don't be foolish, woman. Look at yourself. Look at this." He gestured contemptuously at their makeshift shelter and gathered allies. "Is this really the life you want? We can make you rich." "Rich?" Delilah's laugh held no bitterness, only certainty. "I'm already rich in what matters. I have a husband who sees me truly. Friends who stand beside us. Land that deserves protection, not exploitation." She lifted her chin. "Your money can't buy what I already possess." The railroad man's face darkened. "Don't be naive. We'll get this land one way or another. Better to profit from the inevitable." "Nothing's inevitable," Roman growled, stepping up beside his wife. "Except you leaving. Now." The railroad man opened his mouth to argue, but found himself facing not just Roman's rifle, but the weapons of Nokose's warriors and several settlers as well. His face twisted in fury, but he was no fool. With a sharp gesture to his men, he wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he snapped over his shoulder as they rode away. "No," Delilah agreed softly. "But neither are we." As the sun began to set, their supporters helped construct a proper camp around the line shack. Nokose's warriors set up a rotation for guard duty. The settlers organized the donated supplies and helped repair the shack's worst drafts. Through it all, Delilah moved with quiet purpose, thanking each person, learning names, sharing what little they had. That evening, as people gathered around campfires, sharing food and stories, Roman found Delilah standing alone, gazing at the burned ruins of their cabin visible in the distance. "You did good today," he said gruffly. "Handling all these folks, facing down that railroad man." Delilah leaned against him. "I learned it from you, you know. Standing firm, believing in what's right." She smiled up at him. "Though I reckon you're still learning to accept help when it's offered." Roman chuckled ruefully. "Ain't easy. Spent too many years counting only on myself." "We're not alone anymore," Delilah said softly. "Look around. Every person here chose to stand with us, not out of pity, but because they believe in something bigger than themselves." Roman surveyed the scene, settlers and Ute sharing food and fire, the preacher deep in conversation with Nokos, women organizing supplies for the days ahead. His wife was right. This was more than charity or alliance. This was community being born. "Reckon you're right," he admitted, "though I still ain't comfortable with all this attention." Delilah squeezed his hand. "Sometimes, the greatest courage is in accepting love when it's offered. Took me a while to learn that myself." From the nearest fire, someone started singing a hymn. Other voices joined in, Ute and settler alike finding harmony together. The music rose into the dark sky, a declaration of hope and determination that echoed off the mountain walls. Roman pulled Delilah closer, feeling her solid warmth against him. They had lost their cabin, true, but somehow, they had gained something far more precious, a community united in purpose, standing together against those who would take what wasn't theirs to claim. As the hymn ended, Nokose approached them. "The stars speak of change tonight," the elder said thoughtfully. "The railroad men see only what can be bought and sold. They do not understand that some things, land, water, courage, loyalty, belong to no one and everyone." "We'll hold firm," Delilah promised. "Together." Nokose nodded approvingly. "Yes, together. That is how mountains are moved, not by one person pushing, but by many hands working as one." The night deepened around them, but the darkness held no terror now. Campfires dotted the valley like earthbound stars, each one representing a person who had chosen to stand with them. Roman looked at his wife, seeing not the woman who had stumbled off that stagecoach, but the one who had found her strength and helped others find theirs. "Let the railroad men come," he thought. They would learn what true wealth looked like, not in dollars and deeds, but in the courage of a woman who refused to be bought, and the community that rose up to stand beside her. Dawn broke gray and threatening over the valley. Roman stood at the door of the line shack, watching clouds pile dark against the mountains. The air felt dense, promising snow. Behind him, Delilah stirred breakfast over the potbelly stove, while their allies huddled around morning fires. A rider appeared on the ridge, then another. Soon, 20 railroad men materialized. From the murk, their horses' breath steaming. Roman's grip tightened on his rifle. "Nokose," he called softly. The Ute elder emerged from his shelter, reading the scene with sharp eyes. "They come in force," Nokose observed, "but the weather spirits gather as well." He gestured at the roiling sky. Word spread quickly through the camp. Settlers and Ute warriors alike took up positions, though Roman noticed they followed his lead in keeping weapons lowered. The railroad men formed a line across the valley floor, their leader riding forward alone. "This is your final warning," the man announced, his voice carrying across the snow. "Clear out now, or we'll remove you by force. We have the law on our side." "The law?" Roman stepped forward, Delilah beside him. "Show us the paper that gives you right to stolen land." The railroad man's face reddened. "We don't need papers. We have progress on our side. And 30 more men waiting in town." "Progress built on theft ain't progress at all," Roman replied steadily. The first flakes of snow began to fall, caught in the rising wind. The railroad man's patience snapped. He spurred his horse forward, other riders following. The defenders tensed, but Roman held up his hand. "No shooting," he commanded. "We ain't stooping to their level." The railroad men dismounted, advancing on foot through the deepening snow. One threw a punch at the blacksmith, and the valley erupted into chaos. Fists flew as settlers and railroad men grappled in the snow. Roman found himself wrestling with 2 men, keeping them from their guns while trying not to cause serious harm. The wind howled louder, snow now falling in thick curtains. Visibility dropped to mere feet. Guns were drawn, but fingers fumbled on triggers, too numb with cold to fire. Roman saw Nokose's warriors using their superior winter knowledge to confuse and disorient the railroad men, leading them in circles through the whiteness. "Fall back!" Roman shouted above the storm. Everyone to shelter! He could barely see 2 feet ahead, but he felt Delilah's hand find his arm, guiding him. They stumbled through deepening drifts toward the line shack. Other shapes emerged from the white wall of snow, friends and foes alike, all now equal before nature's fury. Roman and Delilah reached their door first, and he prepared to bar it against their enemies. But Delilah's hand stopped him. "We can't leave them out there to freeze," she said firmly. Roman hesitated, torn between protection and mercy. Then he saw the railroad men stumbling past, no longer fierce enforcers but lost men in danger of death. The storm had stripped away their power, leaving only human beings fighting for survival. "Get inside!" he shouted to everyone within earshot, friend or foe. "Storm's too strong!" The line shack filled quickly. Settlers, Ute warriors, and railroad men pressed together by necessity. Delilah moved among them, distributing blankets without discrimination. The wind screamed outside, rattling the thin walls. Hours passed. The railroad men huddled in corners, their earlier bravado gone. Roman watched them carefully, but the fight had been frozen out of them. Nokose spoke quietly with their leader, words of wisdom about the land's power to humble all men equally. "Your guns mean nothing to the storm," the elder observed, "just as our claims mean nothing to the earth itself. We are all visitors here." The railroad man stared into the stove's flames. "We have orders," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Orders from men who sit in warm offices, far from this valley," Delilah said, offering him a cup of coffee. "They don't know this land like we do. They haven't seen its beauty or its fury." Through the day and into night, the blizzard raged. The shack's occupants shifted from enemies to reluctant companions in survival. Roman watched Delilah move among them, offering food and comfort to all sides equally. Her kindness in the face of their earlier cruelty seemed to shame the railroad men more than any threat could have. As evening deepened, the storm began to ease. The railroad leader approached Roman, his face drawn with exhaustion and something like respect. "Your wife," he said quietly. "She shared her food with my men. After what we did to your cabin." He shook his head. "I've been in this business 15 years. Never met folks who'd choose mercy over vengeance." "Ain't about choosing mercy," Roman replied. "It's about choosing right. The land deserves better than blood." The railroad man nodded slowly. "My men are cold, hungry. Town's our closest chance of shelter. But this ain't over. The company won't just—" "Yes, it is over," Delilah interrupted, her voice firm but gentle. "You'll ride to town and tell your company that this land has protectors. Not just us, but every person here." She gestured around the crowded shack. "We chose justice over violence. Your company can choose to do the same." The railroad men left at dawn, struggling through knee-deep snow toward town. Their leader paused at the door, looking back at Delilah. "Thank you," he said simply. "For the food. For—" he gestured vaguely, encompassing their shelter from the storm. "Most folks wouldn't have." "Most folks forget we're all God's children," Delilah replied. "Even when we're on different sides." Roman watched them go, their shapes growing small against the vast white landscape. Delilah shivered beside him, and he wrapped his heavy coat around them both. "You did right," he whispered in her ear. "Showing mercy like that. You're stronger than any storm, wife. Stronger than all of us put together." She leaned against him, solid and warm. "Not stronger," she corrected. "Just more certain. Some things are worth fighting for, but how we fight matters as much as what we fight for." Nokose approached them, his old eyes bright with approval. "The storm taught wisdom to those who would take by force," he said. "And you taught it better still, with open doors and warm food. This is how peace grows, not through victory, but through understanding." Around them, settlers and Ute alike began clearing snow, rebuilding what the storm had damaged. Their shared ordeal had strengthened their unlikely alliance. Roman watched them work together, seeing not separate peoples but a single community, forged in hardship and mercy. "We'll need to start rebuilding soon," he said, thinking of their burned cabin. "We already are," Delilah replied softly. "Not just walls and roofs, something stronger." Roman hugged her closer, feeling her warmth through his coat. The railroad men might return with new threats, but they would find more than a couple defending their claim. They would face a community united by choice and conscience, stronger than any paper law or corporate decree. The morning sun broke through, setting the snow-covered valley ablaze with light. Roman looked at his wife, seeing the same radiance in her face, the glow of someone who had found her true strength not in force, but in mercy. In that moment, he knew with certainty that they would prevail, not through guns or fists, but through the power of choosing right over might and mercy over vengeance. The storm had tested them all, and in surviving it together, they had built something that no railroad company could tear down. The morning after the snowstorm, Roman hitched the mule to his sled. He and Delilah rode into town, their hearts heavy with worry about their lost deed. The streets were muddy with melting snow, and townsfolk gathered on the boardwalk as they passed. The circuit preacher waited at the church steps, his weathered face creased in a knowing smile. He beckoned them inside, away from curious eyes. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he said, reaching into his worn leather satchel. "After our blessing ceremony, something told me to make a copy of your deed. Filed it proper with the county clerk that very day." Delilah's hands trembled. As he withdrew the official document, its seal bright and unmistakable, Roman steadied her with a gentle touch to her shoulder. "It's all legal and binding," the preacher continued. "Your father's signature, the transfer of ownership, everything witnessed and recorded. The railroad can't contest it without breaking the law themselves. Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks. But why? She whispered. Why did you help us? The preacher's eyes softened. Because I saw two souls joining not just in marriage, but in purpose. When you included Nokosa's people in the ceremony, I knew this land would be more than property. It would be a covenant. Word spread quickly through town. The railroad men, still nursing their wounds from the storm, received telegrams confirming they had no legal recourse. The water rights and timber stands were secured, not as assets to be exploited, but as a trust between settlers and Ute alike. Outside the church, townspeople gathered. The same folk who had jeered at Delilah now watched with different eyes. They saw not an abandoned mail-order bride, but a woman who had faced down corporate greed with dignity and mercy. The whispers were no longer mocking, but admiring. She chose peace when she could have sought revenge, the blacksmith's wife murmured. Gave shelter to the very men who burned her home, added another. Roman stood tall beside his wife, his rough hand holding hers. Nokose arrived with several tribal elders, their presence cementing the unusual alliance that had formed in that snowy valley. The papers speak of ownership, Noko said, but our hearts speak of stewardship. The land, the waters, they belong to all or to none. Delilah nodded, her voice clear and strong. This deed isn't about possession. It's about protection, about doing what's right. The townsfolk, who had once scorned her size, now saw only her grace. The woman they had laughed at for her wrinkled wedding dress now stood before them as a pillar of dignity and strength. In her victory, she had chosen unity over division, respect over humiliation. The first warm breeze of spring whistled through the valley, carrying promise on its wings. Patches of earth emerged from beneath winter's blanket, dark and rich where the snow retreated. Tiny green shoots pushed through the melting drifts, reaching for the strengthening Sunday. Roman stood amid the timber he'd cut, measuring logs for the new cabin's foundation. Nokosa's sons worked alongside him, their skilled hands making quick work of the notching and fitting. The new home would be twice the size of the old one, with room enough for gatherings and guests. A house should breathe with its people, Nokose had said, showing Roman the traditional ways of selecting trees and honoring their sacrifice. Each log was chosen with care, each beam placed with prayer. Delilah watched from near the cooking fire, her heart swelling at the sight of the men working together. She stirred a pot of rabbit stew, adding wild onions she'd found sprouting in a sheltered hollow. The aroma drew workers and visitors alike to her outdoor hearth. There's always room at our table, she would say, ladling generous portions for whoever came by. Settlers and Ute alike found welcome in her circle, their differences forgotten over shared bread and story. She had learned to make traditional dishes from the Ute women, while they eagerly requested her dumplings and biscuits. As spring advanced, the new cabin took shape. Its sturdy walls rose from the earth, each log a testament to cooperation. Roman insisted on extra-wide doorways and reinforced floor joists, ensuring Delilah would never feel confined or unsafe. He built her a proper kitchen with shelves she could reach, and windows placed to catch the morning light. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Roman found Delilah on their new porch. She stood with her hands resting on the railing he'd smoothed especially for her, gazing out over the greening valley. The land that had once been merely a deed on paper had become something more, a bridge between peoples, a sanctuary of peace. Roman's footsteps creaked on the fresh-hewn boards as he joined her. His calloused hand found hers, fingers intertwining with familiar comfort. The evening breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and pine, nature's perfume sweeter than any store-bought fragrance. Who would have thought, Delilah mused, that a mail-order bride nobody wanted would find all this? Roman turned to her, his eyes soft in the fading light. The months had changed him, no longer the awkward virgin mountain man, but a husband who had learned the language of love through patient days and tender nights. "You fit?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Not just in some cabin or bed like I foolishly said that first day. You fit perfect right here. He pressed their joined hands to his heart. In my life. In my soul. Delilah's eyes shimmered. But these were not the tears of shame she'd shed so often in the past. These were tears of joy, of belonging, of coming home at last. She leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him, the unwavering acceptance she'd found in his love. Together they watched the sun sink behind the mountains, painting the sky in farewell colors. The land spread before them, not as property to be owned, but as a promise to be kept. A promise of home, of harmony, of hope fulfilled. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines, it's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.